Ground Passers, and welcome to another edition of Meet the Professionals, a series where we introduce and interview various people working behind the scenes in tennis. Coaches, physios, umpires, stringers, tournament directors, the lot, to give you a better understanding of how the sport operates beyond the players on court. For this episode, we are joined by Calvin Betton, a two-time Grammy award-winning. You know, I'm recording this right after the Grammys because I just said Grammy award-winning. What I meant was Grand Slam winning. Hi, Calvin.
How's it going? Yeah, I don't have any Grammys yet, but let's not write it out.
You never know. Yeah. I know you're a music buff as well, so yeah, maybe a second career could happen.
Let's see.
Oh my goodness. Okay, welcome to Ground Pass, Calvin. Calvin, you are a coach. You coach two British men's doubles players. You coach Henry Patten, who's been on the podcast before, and then also Luke Johnson. And I mean, you've coached Henry now to 2 Grand Slams. So how are you feeling as a coach?
It's been a pretty good start to the year and a pretty good second half of last year as well, to be honest. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been pretty fortunate and we've had some good results, and both Henry and Luke have had a great few months, to be fair. I mean, start of this year in particular, Luke won the first week in Hong Kong. I was there with him then. And then we flew to Australia, and then Henry won in Australia, obviously. So it's been a pretty good few months.
It's been an excellent start to the season, but let's start from the beginning, because in this podcast series, we like to get into what it takes to do what you do. But starting in the beginning, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were little?
Well, going back to the initial one, I mean, I know the first time somebody asked me what I wanted to be, I said I wanted to be either a footballer or a cowboy. And I think neither of those things were going to happen. And then I actually had a real interest. I wanted to be a music producer when I was sort of early 20s. And I just did some tennis coaching. I mean, I was coaching pretty seriously at the time, but and then still playing quite a bit. But I was always aware when I was playing. I mean, I played to a decent level. I played to sort of county regional level, but I always knew that I would go into coaching. It was just a case of when. I went in pretty young. I think I started coaching when I was 22, and I straight away became a head coach at a local club, and I did that job for about 8 years. So yeah.
So how did that transition happen? How did we go from cowboy to tennis? How did tennis enter your life?
I don't think there are many cowboys where I live in the north of England, so I think that's probably put a stopper on that one. But yeah, I mean, I started playing tennis. I only really started playing tennis to any sort of level when I was about 14. I always sort of had, little knockabouts with my friends in parks and that kind of thing, but only actually started playing, going to organised sessions and that kind of thing when I was 14. So I was really late to the sport. But I improved pretty quick and got to a pretty decent level in a short space of time. So, I just really enjoyed tennis. So I kind of always figured that early on it would be part of the rest of my life, really.
And, so you started off as a player. Did you, because you said you were pretty good at when you were playing, did coaching immediately come after, or what was that transition from, okay, I'm playing tennis to actually I'm going to be a coach?
So, I mean, I was always pretty realistic about it. I knew I was decent, but I knew there were players who were way better than me that I wouldn't get to the level of. When I was playing these players, I'd know that if I'd lose certain matches, I knew I'd lost because I'd had a bad day, and I knew I'd lose some because I'm just nowhere near as good as these guys, and I won't be. So, and that was fine. And then, so I always thought I had a pretty good brain for tennis. That's the one thing. I mean, when I was playing, I was pretty quick, I was pretty fast, and also I was pretty good strategically and tactically, and mentally I was pretty good. Like in terms of being a competitor, I used to get quite angry, but I was always a very good competitor, I'd say. It was just like, I mean, I just lacked probably the actual talent, the ability to play beyond what I was. So I always knew that if I wanted to go into coaching, like strategically and tactically, I would always be pretty good. And that's kind of what I decided to do. Like, so when I was still playing, which would have been around 1999, 2000, I was kind of playing, I was doing okay in local money tournaments, that kind of thing, and getting by, but wasn't really pulling up any trees. And then the head coach's position came up at Barnsley Lawn Tennis Club, which is where I live and where I'd done quite a bit of training. So it was kind of one of those, like I had to make a decision really for myself. Do I take this, and it's a pretty good job for what I want to come into in tennis, or do I not take it, and then that kind of job might not come around for another 5 or 6 years. So
right.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'll come to this later on in this interview, but that recognition so early on, because you said you were coaching at 22, like pretty early, that recognition that, you know what, I'm okay at tennis. I think I'm good at tennis, but I'm never, I might not be the greatest, or I might not go further, but I have this other skill. What sort of advice do you have for younger people? And I mean, this could probably be even life advice in general, but to kind of be realistic and recognize that so early on, instead of, going through.
I don't know. I guess, you could say that. I think, I don't think it's defeatist. I've always just been a bit of a realist. I knew that, like, if I was 17, 18 and there was 12, 13-year-olds, and this didn't happen regularly, but there was some 12, 13-year-olds who would come and just be better than me at that stage, I'd go, this is probably not, I'm probably not swinging this round, I'm not, and, I think it's tough for someone who's, like I say, I started playing at 14. It's tough for someone who started playing at 14 to actually get to where they need to go in tennis. And I kind of, you just kind of happen upon what your level is. It's the same in any sport, I think. Your level, once you get to a certain age, you don't start moving up. Like, I was a pretty good, like I said, at 21, 22, I was still winning, still doing okay in local money tournaments and making a bit of money for myself, but not in terms of ranking tournaments and that kind of thing. So it's unlikely that at 22, I was suddenly going to start tearing up the world ranking tournaments.
Right.
And that I didn't see that as any negative thing or being defeatist or anything. It was more like, right, I know how to do this, but what I may be able to do is help some more players who eventually can do that.
Right. Now, so you said you got a job at a club where they were looking for a head coach. You used to play there, but was there any training involved? I'm sure there is training to be a coach, right? To get to certain levels. I
think this is quite an important thing for younger coaches and again, I was no different. This is not me preaching, because, initially I thought, I know how to play tennis, so I therefore know how to coach. And so, what the club told me was that I had to take my coaching qualifications, which I did, but I wasn't entirely committed within that, and thought I knew better all the time. And I wish that I would have gone earlier into understanding what being a coach is, that it's not just knowledge about tennis, it's knowledge about communication and how people learn, that you don't just tell them things. And most people who don't know what coaching is, they'll often come to me and, they'll say, a classic example recently when Djokovic hired Murray, they'll go, well, what can Murray, how can Murray tell Djokovic how to hit a forehand? Well, he doesn't need to tell him how to hit a forehand. He's already won 26 Grand Slams or whatever it is with his forehand. That's not what coaching is. But I think that's what the layman often thinks, but it's not that. It's so much more, that it's understanding how to get information across, what the roles of a coach are. And probably I'd say for 4 or 5 years, I didn't know those things, but thought I just knew better. And then it was only over the course of, even up until, I'd say, probably the first 15 years of my coaching, no, maybe not that long, maybe the first 10, 12 years of my coaching, I didn't really sort of understand what that was. And it was only then when I took my level 3 coaching, which is the first one I took, and then level 4, which I still was kind of in the same boat. It was only when I went to my level 5 with some really good tutors who played a huge part in my development as a coach. That would have been in about 2011 that I started. They opened my eyes up to what actual elite coaching is and what the difference is, and coaching theory and that kind of thing. And it was sort of like a kind of Pandora's box moment, really, where I couldn't put the genie back in the bottle there. There was all this other area of like, oh, this is what coaching is.
Right.
It's not just standing there and feeding some balls and saying, follow through over your shoulder, good shot, and that kind of thing.
Right. So, you've gone through the courses, you are, the head coach at a club. How do you go from that to coaching a player on the ATP World Tour?
So I think a couple of things. I put a lot of hours in. I put, and I was absolutely determined that that's what I wanted to do. I didn't really have much interest in coaching a country club or coaching the social coffee mornings and that kind of thing. I've had to do all that in the pathway of coaching. I think most coaches have, but I knew that's, and some coaches want to do that because there's a lot of money in it. But I think my competitive instinct, I've always had a burning desire to compete and to win things and to be in elite competitive sport. That was always the sort of the lightning rod, really, that just kept pushing me on. So there was that. I took quite a lot of financial hits as well. I spent a lot of time helping out younger players who were good players but couldn't necessarily afford the program that was needed to get them where they needed to be. And over time, I got a few county champions, and then there were a few national champions, a few juniors, like junior national champions, a few junior national number ones as well. And then some of those then started winning adult tournaments. And then over the kind of course, I left the club where I was at, and then I moved to an indoor club in Leeds where my friend was coaching, and he asked me to come and run the performance program at the indoor centre in Leeds. Now, Luke Johnson was training there at the time. I think Luke was about 15, 16. Now, I'd known Luke for some time because he used to play against the players that I used to coach. And we had a pretty good relationship and like that kind of thing. But then as I was there, I didn't actually coach Luke too much there at the time. I helped him out a little bit and always supported him and that kind of thing. And then we kind of stayed in touch and we became pretty good friends. And then Luke went to uni in America. He went to Clemson, which I've actually got a Clemson t-shirt on here that Luke gave me.
Yeah.
And then, so while Luke was there, we stayed in touch while he was there, and I always supported him when I was going to tournaments. Like sometimes I'd be at tournaments with other players I coach, and I'd always go and watch Luke's matches and support him. And then I was coaching another player full time, one of the juniors I coached, who won junior nationals, who then got a sponsor. And I coached him full time for 2 years up until 2019. And Luke at this stage had finished uni, and he'd come back to Britain, and he was training at a place called Bath in the south of England, where they had some good coaches and some good players. But I think Luke wanted to move back up north. So in 2019, I stopped coaching the lad I was going to coach, and I was just basically having a general conversation, I think, over text with Luke, saying, yeah, I've stopped coaching this lad who I've been coaching, this kind of thing. And then back 2 days later, Luke phoned me up and said, I'm thinking about, I don't think I probably want to move back up north and maybe not train at Bath so much. And I wondered if you would coach me while I'm up north now, because I didn't have anything on at that time. So, yeah. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And we, we'd done work before, so it was nothing new and that kind of thing. And that was at the very end of 2019. And then, so we did one pre-season together, which was really good. Then we did one trip to Tunisia, which was pretty good. And then COVID hit. So then we had basically about 8 months of doing nothing. But then the first tournament back after COVID, we went to Portugal. Luke and I, there were 2 tournaments in Portugal. I went with him, and in the second week of those tournaments was where I met Henry for the first time.
Okay.
And Henry was just friends with Luke and a couple of the British lads, and I think we went out for a couple of dinners and a couple of lunches and got on well. Didn't actually start coaching Henry till about 18 months later. But yeah, so that's how I ended up meeting both of the lads who I coach.
So is that, I'm just thinking now of maybe a young person taking up coaching, they feel like this is something they want to do. Is that generally how these relationships form and start? You meet people at tennis clubs, or maybe you spot a junior. I mean, there isn't sort of a list, hey, Grand Slam champion looking for a coach, kind of thing.
I don't know. I mean, I think my sort of pathway has been pretty unique. I don't think most of the coaches who coach amongst on the tour, I think they've all been better players than I was, I would think, although I was okay, but I think they've all been probably significantly better players than I was. But I think that kind of becomes irrelevant as well. But I think that's how they got into that space, really, that they just know players from having played. And that's where a lot of coaches end up who work with players. They played and then they stopped playing, and then one of the players who they played with asked them to coach them, which I think is probably one of the reasons why. So
the Novak Murray thing wasn't really that much of a stretch.
No, I think it was just that was just a more. I think that kind of thing happens all the time at lower levels,
right?
But I think and I also think that's one of the reasons why coaches don't develop too much. They never really feel they have to, So when I started coaching 25 years ago, that I knew I had to get better as a coach, because I don't want to be coaching at this club forever. I don't want to be coaching beginners. I don't want to be coaching doctors at 7 o'clock in the morning on a cold outdoor court. So How do I get away from that? I have to work harder. I have to start learning how to coach. I have to get my players better. Whereas I think a lot of coaches, they go straight from playing into decent coaching jobs with players, and they just think, well, why would I need to get any better? I'm already at that place where I want to be.
Right, and they go from player to player.
I think I do, like I said, I think the two things about this kind of got me where I've got is that like I say, I wasn't that level of player, but also I think I'm certainly the only coach who I know who's on that tour who's actually worked at a club for years. No, I'm probably lying there. There are a couple of my friends who have, but and again, I can count them as very good coaches. But most of the coaches who I see, they've never actually done any coaching. And what I mean by coaching is they've never actually had to do coaching that isn't performance coaching. Even some of them, they get, even the ones that do work in clubs, they go and they're straight away in as head of performance with the best juniors, as opposed to, right, this is what you've got.
Right, yeah. So getting into the coaching job a little bit, because I think tennis is very much unlike every other sport where I feel like coaches are coaching a team of people and they're hired by an organization. You were hired by Luke. You were hired by Henry. It's like a very individual interaction or contract in that way. What do you think could be the pitfalls of that, or how do you navigate that sort of relationship as a coach, and what sort of advice would you give to someone trying to navigate that?
I think again, I think that the relationship I have with Luke and Henry, and I started this with both of them, the agreement that we had is that we wouldn't have any disagreements about money. And we would say, look, I said to both of them, look, let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what you can afford. And then if you can't, if this is what I think would be an appropriate amount, and if you can't afford that, you tell me. And if you can afford more than that at any stage, then you tell me. But and that's something that we've always stuck by, and I trust them implicitly. And I said to both of them, and we all agreed, look, it's a kind of British term, let's not take the piss out of each other. And I think that's something that we've always worked by, and why we have such a trust and a great relationship, that we've always been front up. And if it came to a stage, I know that at any stage, if they're both doing pretty well now, but before that, if it came to a stage where, the money wasn't coming in and they couldn't afford it, and they said, look, I want to keep working you, but I can't afford this, then I would have dropped down again. I'd have said, right, okay, we're in this project together, and this, I'll make some adjustments and that kind of thing. So I think that, and again, I think that is quite unique. I don't have contracts with either lads. I've coached them both now in the long term, but we don't have contracts. We don't even have an agreed, I know most coaches have an agreement, this is the amount of weeks that they will do. We don't do that. With both players, I say, you let me know when you want me and I'll be there. And they're good friends with each other as well. And, we've never come to any disagreements on weeks that I'll do with either one of them.
Right. Yeah. I
And,
feel
and
like
that,
this
that
is,
applies as well now, I think, as well with, I also work with Harry when we're away. Harry has his own coach, Boris, who's a good friend of mine. But
Mhm.
when we travel, and Henry does the same deal with Boris, and when I'm away, Harry's the same thing. And I say, look, this is how it's going to be. I think I've just found that it works well. But in order to do that, you have to have a trust and responsibility with each other, and we do. And I'm extremely lucky in that regard that both lads who I work with, or with Harry as well, or three lads who I work with, they're very good people, and
right.
I think that has helped, and that's been the luckiest aspect of my career that I've had.
And is that kind of, because even listening to you talk, it feels like, I mean, you're part of the team. It's almost like an investment for you in a sense. Like, is that something, you would encourage, if you find someone that you really believe in and you want to coach, are you just also partly investing in their success a bit?
Look, I mean, they have to go out and win the matches, and it's their ability and everything. And they may still even do that without me there. I wouldn't be egotistical enough to think that that I'm so important that they wouldn't get by without me or anything like that. But at the same time, I do know that I'm quite a big character when I'm coaching, hopefully in a good way, and I think I kind of steer the ship as well. But that's all I do. I drive the ship, but they're the parts, and they're the engine and all the good stuff that comes with it. But I know there are times where, and look, we're the same as players. We're the same as, we have to keep our emotions in track. We sometimes have bad days. We sometimes have good days. And I think we're only human and that kind of thing. But I think coaching encapsulates everything. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This brings me to sort of, I think whatever career it is, we always tend to look at only the bright parts. Like, you won 2 Grand Slams. Yay. What do you think the hardest parts of your job is, or what has been sort of a difficult moment in your career as a coach?
Look, I mean, in doubles especially, there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows. It's, the emotions are up and down. We've had some great times this year, but we've had some pretty bad ones as well. Like US Open wasn't great. We played pretty bad when we lost in US Open. And I say we because I can't count myself as a part of the team when we're winning and not when we're losing. We had a bad day there, and then there are days where you don't have bad days, but it just doesn't work out. Like, I remember a couple of things at the end of the year, like the Beijing final, when we played actually Bolelli and Vavasori in the final, and played great. Henry and Harry played great tennis in that. And somehow it was just one of those where the double scoring system, we absolutely battered them for about 85% of the match. And then 10 minutes later, we'd lost. And I think afterwards, I remember being shell shocked and thinking, how's that happened? How has that happened? And then similar thing happened in Vienna in the semi-final. Like, for about a set and a half, Henry and Harry played, I think, as good as it's possible for anybody to play doubles. Like, they were absolutely different level to anything I've seen. And then, a bad 10 minutes and we were in a tie break. And then even in the tie break, we were up and then lost that. And, you feel it's pretty bad. It's quite strange though, Wimbledon and the Aussie Open were great moments and Turin was great as well. But in the moment, you don't think about winning slams, so I was probably as elated when Luke won in Hong Kong as I was at the end of the Aussie Open. Yeah, given 5 minutes after that, you start thinking, geez, it's a Grand Slam. It's another slam.
Yeah.
And I think the only, maybe it's a bit different because you're there longer. You feel like you've been at the tournament a long time. And I know that when Luke won his first tournament in Metz, his first tour tournament, that was, I was so happy about that and so over the moon that you don't think at the time, well, you don't celebrate because it's a bigger tournament, because actually in the moment, it's just, even we've had second round matches where I've been fired up. Yeah. I think it was quite a journey, but the first round in Adelaide, me and Harry in that one got really fired up because they saved, I think, 6 match points in that match. and won. But, so you don't, it's just ups and downs. I don't necessarily look, I'm single and I don't have any family. So I imagine the worst parts of it are you don't get to be around your family or your other half, but that doesn't actually hit me too much. So
right.
I don't mind being away, and, I quite enjoy it, and it's kind of the life I've chosen. And to be honest, I don't really know how to do anything else, and I don't much want to either. So in terms of what I don't know if there are any bad parts other than losing. I hate losing. That's the worst part.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm also, I've kind of got to understand, I have become more philosophical with it. I said to Luke, Luke and Sander, his partner, lost in Montpellier a couple of days ago, and they lost 10-6. And yeah, I was gutted for them. I was gutted, but I said to them, I was like, we're probably due one, because I think they've won 7 match tiebreaks in a row. Like over Mets and Hong Kong, they won 7 out of those 8 matches in match tiebreaks. And, kind of that the other day, and also in the Aussie Open when they lost to Doumbia and Raboul, and they lost in 2 set tiebreaks there. And I said to them again, like we got to take the rough with the smooth. We've won a lot of those close tiebreaks, and they have won a lot. And I'd say the same, that if you're winning about 65% of the match tiebreaks, you're having a pretty good time of it. If you're winning 70, you're having a really good time of it. So to be winning 100% and then losing 1, you've kind of got to, it's one of them.
Yeah.
And I think it makes a lot, it makes a lot of difference as well on the tour. Like last year, I think that Mektic and Koolhof, who I think ended the year as like the 4th best team, they won 14 out of 17 match tiebreaks, I think.
Wow.
And you think, like, what does a year look like if they only win 60% of those? Like, they only lost 3 all year, and they lost 2 of them to Henry and Harry.
Okay, let's look a little bit towards, the current game a bit and the future. I think, so Ground Pass specifically, we target newer fans to the sport, or maybe people coming back into it. And for people coming back into it, coaching has never been a thing. But I think over the last few years, or couple of years anyway, I feel like coaches in general have come more to the forefront because coaching in tennis is now legal. It's allowed. What have you thought of that process where, it's gone from just trying to put mics in the stands and having coaches yell at their players from high above the stands to what the Australian Open did, where they put you right on court. You were right there, and you could, they could walk up to you and talk to you.
I mean, that, to be fair, that was no different to me, really, because the courts where we normally play on, I'm in exactly the same place. So there's no major difference there for me at all in that. I use the iPad a little bit, but not loads. I do think it's a great idea that they're trying to involve coaches more. I think that there's a lot to add. I think viewers would like to hear what coaches are saying. I think whether that be with interviews before and during the match, and also like to hear what they're saying to their players. Often there's not a lot to say. Often, like 90% of it is 90% of it is this one. Let's go right here. I think it's right just now. One of those things. Yeah, but I think there are some characters who are coaches, and I think that it would when you're hearing from NBA coaches during the match and that kind of thing, and I think that's a great addition. Then why not add why not have some tennis coaches talking?
Right. I was going to say, because most sports here in the States, who the coaches are. A team, and who the coach is. So I think it's very interesting. I like it. I like to I love behind the scenes in general of everything. So it's nice to sometimes hear what people are talking about, even though I know we're probably not going to get a lot because it's all tactics and strategy.
Yeah, I think like when the doubles guys in Washington last year, they played around with miking them up for it. But I think most of it was, I think what most people were disappointed in, that 95% of it is just going reg T, stay. Let's go eye wide cross. And that's all they got. And
yeah, I loved it. I actually interviewed Henry and Harry at the City Open last year, and I interview them before.
Shall I blame you for that performance then that they
Yes,
it's all, because that was probably the worst match they played all year.
It was all me. But I talked to them before they did the little experiment thing. And yeah, you're right. And for me, and I think as a viewer who's new to the sport, watching it on TV, I just wanted someone to explain, what does ITY, what does that mean? Someone, if there's like a little graphic that says this is what that means or whatever, I think there's a future in it because, I don't know, you learn a little bit more about the game, about the sport that you love. And
yeah, I mean, I think that the commentary, to be fair, on doubles that I've heard in the last year has been, in the main, absolutely ridiculously bad. Like it's not. I watched around at Christmas time, I watched the Wimbledon semi and the final over 3 days. And that's the first time I'd actually watched the match with commentary. And I couldn't believe in both matches how bad it was. Like there was no information at all.
Right.
And,
yeah.
and I said at the Australian Open, I saw a little bit of a clip of the semi-final when Henry and Harry played Kravitz and Puetz.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw Robbie Koenig the next day, who was commentating on it. And Robbie, like in the commentary, he said, like, that's Calvin Henry's coach. And I said to Robbie the next day when I saw him that the lads had been on, Henry and Harry had been on, so they won Wimbledon. So they had 6 matches there. I think the last 4 matches had commentary on them. So that's 4 matches there. I think one of the matches in the US Open did, maybe the 3rd round, commentary on it. All 4 matches they played in Turin had commentary on, which I watched all of those back. And then the quarterfinal in Australia had commentary. And the semi-final of Australia was the first time that any commentator mentioned my name in all of those matches.
Really?
Yeah. And that's not just me. That
right.
was like in the Wimbledon final. The Wimbledon final had 3 hours of tennis, and not once did they mention any of the coaches' names. And the cameras kept going to the boxers. They kept going there. The only person they mentioned was Leighton Hewitt, because he was there as Australia Davis Cup captain.
Right.
In Turin, you have 2 cameras on you all of the time. And wasn't mentioned. No coaches were mentioned. And you think,
Could
like,
be
come
better.
on. And I've only had in all of the commentary. No, I tell a slight lie there, because in Beijing, a friend of mine, Anki Othawang, who's I guess a friend of mine, she messaged me before the Beijing semi-final and said, "I'm commentating on the match. Can you give me some background and info on your team and on the other team?" And that's the only time that any commentator before Australia, a few in Australia asked me, like Matt Pedgie asked me, I think Robbie Koenig asked me as well. That's the only time up until that point, no commentator had asked me for any info. And that's fine if they have their own info. But
correct.
When you see they're on and they don't, and they're just waffling for an hour and a half, you think, come on, like, you're getting paid for this. It's not really an acceptable job to be doing this. And I know some of the commentators, that's not to tar some of the commentators, because I know some of them who haven't commentated on doubles, but I've worked with a few commentators, and I know that some of them are excellent in their research, but the people who were doing the doubles matches were not. And shamefully, it's the bigger names.
And, I think I might let you go a little bit on sort of like the state of the doubles, because I think, having this information, if I'm just, someone at home watching the TV and someone's commentating on doubles, and I can get some sort of information about, like, who are these players? What are their, who's the coach? What are they talking about? Like, what's their strategy? What's their, all that stuff. I think it helps sell the game a little bit. But, I got into doubles a lot last year after talking to Will Buchek. He's the,
I know Will,
Will. Will is awesome. And we had him on the podcast. And to be honest, I watched the Bryan brothers. Like, that was my doubles. I watched the Bryan brothers, and whenever Serena and Venus played together, that was, that was it. And, he sort of forced me a little bit, or shamed me, if you want to say, to, like, wait a second. I watch a lot of tennis. Why am I not including doubles in it? And through that, I found Henry and Harry, and it was so fun watching them through Wimbledon. It was such a nice story, and I feel like that sells the sport a bit too. But what do you think as a doubles coach, can be done better to sell the doubles story? Because I think there's so much there that is
the first thing they can do is actually try to sell it and make an effort, because that isn't happening at the minute. And not only is it not happening, there's actually a concerted effort to not sell it by certain people within the ATP's executive sphere, I guess, that we get the feeling that they're just trying to close it down, and all we hear is the product's crap. The product doesn't work. And I don't know what that means. It's a bit corporate speak, but I don't think the product's bad at all. I know from the matches I've watched, I know from the comments that I get from hundreds of fans, I know from being at tournaments, I've been in stadiums. I've been in Bucharest last year when Henry and Harry, an Englishman and a Finn, played two Frenchmen in the final 4 hours before the singles final, and the stadium was full. Like, those people haven't come to wait around 3 hours. They've come specifically to watch a doubles match. I've been on centre court at Wimbledon when when they won Wimbledon. I've been on number one court in the semi-final. People came to watch it. I've been at the Australian Open this year where, bizarrely, the Australian Open, the way it's organised, is a bit strange, because in the first 3 rounds you get everyone. The stands are always full to watch doubles, and then when they put them on the bigger stadiums, there's less grounds passes being sold, so you don't have anybody watching them. But the first 2 rounds, and that's all of the match, every single doubles match I watched, and I go out on the grounds and watch quite a bit, the stands are always packed. People like to watch it, and no one will convince me that people aren't interested and that people don't have a thirst to learn more about it. And I think the most important thing as well is that doubles players are interesting characters, and there's real characters there, and there's a real natural drama and intrigue and story just because of the nature of it's 2 people. Sometimes they don't get on. Sometimes they get on great and then don't get on again. Sometimes they get poached by other partners and that kind of thing. And I think that I said at the time, and I've said it many times since, that tennis really made a mess up with that Netflix series. Real drama would have been, the real show would have been on the doubles tour.
Right.
But what you got is a watered down, anodyne PR advert where you had agents basically telling the cameras what they could ask, what they could see, and that kind of thing. And it wasn't based in any form of reality. If you'd have put that on the doubles tour, I genuinely think you'd have had one of the best sports documentaries that we've seen.
Right. Hopefully they'll, bring it back. I think the biggest thing with that was the producers just had never watched tennis before. So,
well, they didn't get any story either. Like, I know that when you compared it to the other, like the golf and the Formula one, you got a story going throughout a season. Whereas on this one, were just one-off episodes that weren't real, and they were months after. And everything that happened in it, there was nothing that happened in the show that people didn't already know. But yeah, I think if anybody wants to fund a documentary on any sport, doubles tennis is the one, I think.
I feel like Netflix, they need to give it another shot, because it could have been so good. It's one of the most painful things, but that's another episode. It's another episode of the podcast. But I have a couple more questions here just to sort of wrap up talking about your tennis career and coaching a little bit. What advice, someone coming up, I have to say, I do love your approach to it, in the sense that, you say most coaches currently are players who really didn't then make it and now they're just coaches. But what advice, if there's someone like you or listening to this who feels like, okay, this is a way to do it, where I actually focus on being a coach, what advice do you have for young people trying to do that?
I mean, I'd say just learn how to coach, understand the theory of coaching, and read and study it. And even if you have to go to university and study sports coaching, I never actually did that, because I thought I knew too much too early. But later on, I went and read all the books about the coaching, the theory of coaching and that kind of thing, and how to organize practices, how to plan practices, and how people develop and how people learn, and about constraint-led coaching and affordances and that kind of thing. And it was long and it was boring, but it's something I had to do, and I'm a better coach because of it. And also, when you come across good coach educators, good tutors and mentors, listen to them. Don't just think I know better than them and come across like a bit of an idiot like I've done at times and go, well, who have they ever coached? That's not what it's about. It's not linked to that. they don't have to have coached anybody if they understand how people learn things and look at other sports. I spent years going into other sports, obscure sports like sailing and rowing and canoeing and football and basketball and bobsleigh and that kind of thing, and seeing how they coached and how they went about things. You have to put the hours in, and yeah, you have to take a financial hit because of it. But if you do, and yeah, on top of it as well, you've also got to be a good coach. You have to know the sport as well and have an understanding of strategy and moments and that kind of thing, which I think I do have a natural ability to that. It's not just all hard work. It's like being a tennis player as well. It's not just hard work and you'll get there. I think I work pretty hard, but I also think that the main reason I've had a bit of success recently is because I'm a good coach as well. I know what I'm talking about.
Right. This is a question that was really great. But this is a question that came up in a recent episode we do, and I've been thinking about it ever since. This might be out of left field a little bit, but there's this sort of issue of sort of growing the sport of tennis, but maybe even through coaching. In the States here, I don't think you have it that much in the UK, but in the States here, we have a pickleball problem, if that's what you want to call it. I just think, all racket sports fine, but we do have this sort of inundation of pickleball taking over tennis courts and things like that. And someone came up, and I was talking to someone about it, and their thought was, well, there aren't that many good grassroots coaches that can help people who become fans of tennis, start playing tennis, and then keep them being, to grow the sport that way, if that makes any sense. So, for example, just to, instead of making sure they can rally, it's more sort of like you're holding it wrong or whatever. Do you think grassroots coaches have any sort of impact on the growth of the sport, like coaches who are in a club like the one that you were talking about?
I mean, yeah, 100%. And I think it's a different kind of job. It's something that I was never particularly good at, like being the sort of Pied Piper and that kind of thing, and bringing in loads and loads of kids and keeping them involved in that kind of thing. I was always too focused on, right, is he any good? He's good, right. He's good. I'm taking those three. They'll be the players I work with. And, but it's a different kind of gig to what I do. And that's not remotely to dismiss it. I think it's equally as important for the sport, even more important than probably what I do. But I do think, yeah, it's a major issue. I think particularly in the States as well, is that from what I know, the coaches, they tend to just get tempted by the country clubs where they can charge a fortune. And that's not really bringing too much into the sport. You're coaching somebody who's already quite rich, but I don't really know how you get around that. And I know that the coaching that I see from the States isn't particularly great either. That the coaches in America are not, from my experience, they're not particularly open to learning new coaching skills, especially the older generation.
Right. Work in progress. But Calvin, I mean, okay, you've won 2 Grand Slams. What's next? 4 for 26?
3, 4, 5. Yeah, I mean, look, we don't really set goals massively. You have natural goals that you want to aim. Like Luke, I think he's now 50 in the world. His next aim would be top 30 to try, and so he's playing in all the Masters. Like, he's now getting in all the slams. Touch wood. You never know. Like, you hope that they're all playing all the slams, and he's now playing all the slams, and he's getting most of the 500s. It's now a case of trying it in the Masters. And Harri, the obvious one is, from where they are now, is world number 1. Like, would be a nice touch, and more slams, more Masters. They still haven't won a Masters. They've not been past the quarterfinals of a Masters yet because they just haven't played any. So this will be the first time that Henry is going to have played a full year of Masters. So he didn't play Indian Wells last year. He didn't play Miami last year. He's never played Indian Wells, never played Miami. He's never played Madrid. He played Rome, but they got in on the morning. So they flew on the morning of their match.
I think I remember that story.
Yeah.
Tennis.
So, and I think it's also like, I think as well, what people don't realize with the doubles tour is that how crazy it is. Like, Luke just messaged me an hour ago saying they've got into Rio, him and his partner, and he was saying that so his 4 weeks will be France, America, France, Brazil.
Wait.
So he played Montpellier, then they got into Dallas. Didn't get into Rotterdam, but got into Dallas. So go to Dallas. And then playing Marseille, and then won't get into what's the next? Won't get into Doha and Dubai, but will get into Rio. Yeah. So, and I think, when I
complain about time zones when I have to watch the tennis.
I mean, the crazy thing though with Rio is it's actually only 3 hours different from the UK. So Rio's actually not bad. It just takes ages to get there. But
right. That just seems, that's like a cross, that's just back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. I don't think it's what I don't think it's what anyone would want to do, but it's kind of like you play what you can get in.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been an awesome interview, Calvin. Thank you so much for coming on Ground Pass. I learned a lot. I could have talked for longer, but we have to be respectful of time. So, yeah. Thank you for coming on Ground Pass, and I hope to see you somewhere on the grounds.
Yeah, somewhere. Sure, yeah. But thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Of course.
Really appreciate you giving me the time. And if you see me at one of the tournaments, come and say hello.